Good afternoon. This is Media Center Ukraine, Odesa, and we are starting today with the briefing dedicated to the fact that UN Commission to investigate crimes in Ukraine has not yet concluded that genocide is taking place in Ukraine. Our speaker online is Vyshniakova, lawyer in the field of the international criminal law. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you for the invitation. The convention was developed by Ukrainian lawyers and was taken in 1948. What are the signs of the genocide? And I can hear my voice now, and now it's better. This is too ambitious to say that the convention was developed by Ukrainian lawyers, but we should start this talk with the nature of the international criminal law. Convention in the area of international criminal law, including the Convention on Genocide, is some kind of a compromise, not a consensus, but a compromise. So usually there are some high ideas and concepts that should be reflected in an agreement. But what is an agreement? When we have a lot of different parties and they should find a solution that could be acceptable by all of them. Raphael Lemkin, who studied at Lviv, had a wider understanding of that convention. He believed that should be more dedicated to cultural and sociological issues. But then it was not voted in full. It was neutered, so to say. And this notion of genocide was excluded from the convention. And we're talking about this crime. And it is very hard to prove this, because the threshold is very high. So when we say about the threshold, what is meant when it comes to some crimes, not a social and political phenomena, we're talking about a clearly defined legal concept, and there are some elements that should be proved. So we need specific evidence to prove it. And when it comes to the crime of genocide, this evidence should be in a specific quantity and quality to prove it. And this is really very difficult. When it comes to military crimes, war crimes, and more than 100,000 of such crimes have already been registered on the territory of Ukraine. And there is also crimes against humanity. Unfortunately, the Ukrainian Criminal Code does not envisage such types of crimes, and this made it even more difficult, because the genocide, as it's seen in Ukraine, this is a crime against humanity. And there is a separate group, which is a genocide. These are three different types of crimes, and it is we should understand that not everything that has been happening in Ukraine can be qualified from the legal point of view as a genocide. But what happened, these things that happened in Bucha, Irpin, Mariupol, isn't it a manifestation of a genocide? I am, as a Ukrainian citizen, use all legal, non-legal vocabulary with regard to what has been happening in Ukraine. I work in the Kharkiv Oblast. 2 weeks ago, I was in Vovchansk. 3 weeks ago, I was in Izum. I was in Kupiansk and in other cities in those regions. And when I travel around those territories, it is very difficult for me to keep myself in some legal frames, because I can see that part of Ukraine has been destroyed. People were destroyed, and part of the country was destroyed. But when I put a hat of a lawyer, and I am should be limited to specific concepts. This is not the first UN's report where they say that they do not see genocide. And I saw the discussions in social media that they are the photos of people killed, of civilian objects destroyed. Isn't it a genocide? But we have war crimes that includes the killings, rapes, tortures of civilian people, and attacks against civilian facilities. So this is the question of proper qualification of these crimes. If we have the concept of a crime, there are two parts. This is an objective part, actus reus, and there is a subjective part, mens rea. So the objective part is what happens in an environment, in a space, and the subjective part is the mind of a criminal. To prove the war crime and we can see the killed civilians. This is actus reus. So we have civilians, persons killed, which is the result of the armed conflict. And these civilians were the target of the attack. So that was not the collateral damage that killed them. And this is the direct impact, which is a war crime. If we can see that these civilians are killed as a result of systematic, massive attack, which happens because of the leadership of the Russian Federation, then this is a crime against humanity. But to prove genocide, we should prove that these civilians were killed not just because they were on the territory of Ukraine, and not just because they are Ukrainians, because this will have the war crime or a crime against humanity. But we should prove that these civilians are killed, and I would like to emphasize this, to kill the whole Ukrainian nation. And I would like to repeat this once again. They are killed not because they are Ukrainians, but to kill the whole nation. And this is the special genocide intent. And we can prove it in different ways. And sorry for this cynical words, the collecting of the facts of destructions, tortures, rapes, etc. This is not enough. Of course, the quality can become an evidence. There is the difference between killing 10 people and 100,000 of people. But it is very important to prove that there was the intent of a criminal to kill the whole Ukrainian nation. And here we come to the second complexity. And in different criminals' cases, and I can hear this quite oftenly from politicians and journalists, that Russia is genocide in Ukraine. When it comes to Ukrainian courts, international courts, we do not talk about the whole Russia. We cannot speak about the whole Russia, all Russians, Russian army. We should speak about a specific person responsible for genocide, having an intent. So it is disputable who could be brought to liability because of the genocide. So sometimes people say that this is the allied crime. Everyone can be brought to the liability for genocide, but we should prove the intent of the Russian leadership, and we need to collect evidence. And it is very important how to collect this evidence. For example, a serviceman of the Russian Federation says that he has come to Ukrainian territory to destroy Ukrainian people. Could it be the element of this evidence base? Of course. We should understand that we need some quantity of evidence. So this phrase of destroying Ukrainians, the intent, this is not enough. And there is a Rome Statute that envisages a separate document listing all elements of a crime. And this should be a systematic state policy. We need to get access to orders. We need to collect evidence that to prove this intent of the destruction of the whole Ukrainian people. But when you develop your strategy, you need to understand both parties. There could be the counter-argument, the destruction of the whole Ukrainian nation, and how just a common soldier can destroy the whole Ukrainian nation. He doesn't have tools for that. The Genocide Convention envisages the whole image, and there are 4 specifically defined groups, and there is the formulation in full or partially. But when it's come to partially, this is not only about some number of people, but this should be a significant amount, a significant group. And the destruction of the part of group could lead to the destruction of the whole nation. So this is not more about quantity, but about quality. One of the strategy of proof which could be effective, and I believe that this is effective, this is the collection of evidence proving the destruction of cultural heritage. I remember when we came to Kherson on the second day after liberation, after the occupation, we visited the Kherson Fine Arts Museum to look at the patterns of what they stole. And this is not the only museum of Ukraine that was robbed by Russians. And we looked at specific objects of cultural heritage. Russians tortured those people who spoke Ukrainian, but we need to prove it, and because not all people speaking Ukrainian were tortured, and when the genocide was proved in the Yugoslavia conflict, the genocide was proved only in Srebrenica because they could not prove a genocide in other similar situations there. Because there is a question why not all people are tortured. When Russians came to Ukraine, and if they just had come to Ukrainian territory, killing all people speaking Ukrainian. This is one issue, but this was not the case. But that's why we need to collect information about the crimes against cultural heritage, about the cases when they just destroyed by fire Ukrainian books. And we can speak about hatred to everything Ukrainian. And according to Ukrainian practice, this hatred could be used as the element to prove the genocide and the intent. But again, we should develop a precise strategy. Everything should be technically correct from the legal point of view. And I think that this is the only strategy how we can prove it. And Mikhailo Podolyak says that the decision of this commission is of political nature, that they are too weak. And we have a question about our audience. Is this report is important? Because we focus a lot on this report, but we need to understand, is it really important or not, how we should perceive this. Everything related to political domain, and I try to focus more on legal aspects. When parliaments started voting for these resolutions, or in and that this actually all countries thus acknowledge that there is genocide in Ukraine through parliamentary resolution because it was accepted by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. But we should differentiate between political declaration, social perception, and legal facts. For example, last year I went to Cambodia to better understand the situation, how they managed to prove genocide there. And I think that most people know about the situation in Cambodia in 1917, when the quarter of country was destroyed during Pol Pot reign. And before coming there, I believed that the genocide in Cambodia was an obvious fact, like in Rwanda and other countries. But there's a genocide in Cambodia when the millions of people were killed. It was not like qualified as genocide. That was the war against the crime against humanity. But in Rwanda, there was the International Criminal Tribunal that qualified that as the genocide. And when it happened, the United States were in the Security Council, and they said that they are not going to introduce any troops to support Rwanda because the United States was too preoccupied about its failure in Somalia in 1992, and in parallel there was the situation in Yugoslavia. And 1,800,000 people were officially killed, and that was the political toothlessness. But what is happening in Darfur? There is a huge debates now around that. When it comes to political approach to acknowledging genocide, some measures should be taken. This is on the border between policy and judicial domain. This is RTP, responsibility to protect. When we have such mass crimes like genocide, we should have an active response to that of other countries, because some nation could be destroyed. I'm trying to detach myself from the political agenda, but there is kind of a political hesitation when it comes to the situation in Rwanda, when the active measures should be taken. As for the, so to say, toothlessness of the UN, I could not comment upon that. We have the great number of the UN cars in Ukraine, but I have not seen any UN car in Kharkiv Oblast. But we have different UN agencies that could be more active. I can say nothing about UNICEF because they do significant contribution. But as for the UN Commission, I cooperated with them during the first report in March. And we discussed back then such notions and incitement to commit genocide. We should discuss incitement because there is the Russian propaganda, and initially they said that we need to destroy Ukrainian nation. But after March, they stopped discussing that because now they understand that they could be brought to liability for incitement, and we should direct our resources properly, because there is no massive discussion of the incitement to genocide. And this crime is also very severe because there is the huge machine of propaganda behind that. And I would also like to say about the following. The position of Ukraine is quite interesting because we discuss genocide a lot, but there is no official translation of the Genocide Convention on the website of the authorized prosecutors who should investigate that. So we should not only make some political statements, but we should work and take specific texts. Anna, we have one more question that we received online. 64th Brigade, the Brigade of Berets, has named Guardian Brigade by Putin. Could be this the indirect evidence of, and yes, but I would like to say that there is the difference between military and war crimes. Quite often, journalists or just ordinary people just mix these notions. Military crimes, these are the crimes of the army, the crimes related to the military, that the military, the servicemen commit as soldiers. This is not following orders of their commanders. But when it comes to war crimes, this is a different group of crimes. These are the severe crimes according to the international law. When we use such word combinations as the crimes against Ukrainians, civilians, these are the war crimes, not military crimes. And of course, we could say that that award Putin is an indirect evidence, because this means that Putin supports what is happening in Ukraine. In Rwanda, there was the case of Musema, if I'm not mistaken, the case about tea factory. Musema, who was the manager, the head of the tea factory, and he did not take any measures to prevent his employees from committing genocide. He did not do anything. So he did not fire them. He did not take cars from them. The fact that he did not do anything, this is the command responsibility, and we don't have in Ukraine. Our Ukrainian legislation has not been adapted to international standards. The Rome Statute has not been ratified in Ukraine, so we should have some active measures from our state. But the fact that Putin awards someone means that he motivates people, that he incites people and encourages specific activities. This could be one of the evidence, but not the only one. And I have one more question from myself about the convention. One of the articles is related to compulsory handing over of children from one ethnic group to another. And do we have enough evidence that Russians just kidnap our children? Could it be the evidence of genocide? Convention against genocide envisages several alternatives. And this is about the objective part. The forcible deportation of children is an objective part, but this could be a war crime, this could be a crime against humanity, and this could be also a genocide. So, proving mere fact of this compulsory deportation of children is not enough. I have investigated that. This is not my specialization, but I've seen that during my trips there, and the numbers, they are terrifying. And for me, as for the Ukrainian citizens, this is something beyond good and evil. But from the legal point of view, to prove genocide, we need to prove that this deportation has as an intention the destruction of the Ukrainian nation or significant part of Ukrainian citizens, leading to the destruction of the whole nation. And the last question, the short one, the destruction of the energy infrastructure of Ukraine. Is it a genocide? This is a very interesting question. I think that was back in March, and I just conducted trainings for Ukrainian prosecutors. And at the beginning of one of the training sessions, I also asked them the same question about the destruction of energy facilities, because that was in March. We were just recovering from that difficult winter. And I asked prosecutors, and they told me that, yes, of course, this is obvious. But one of the tasks of that training session was to prove that the destruction of this energy infrastructure is a genocide. And they could not prove it because the destruction of the energy infrastructure is clearly war crime. But it is difficult to prove that the destruction of energy infrastructure and facilities could lead to the destruction of the whole Ukrainian nation. And this is impossible to do now. It is very important to understand this is no hierarchy of crime. We cannot say what is more severe, like robbery rape or homicide. These are different types of crimes. Attorneys, lawyers can say that aggression is the mother of all crimes. Genocide is the father of all crimes. War crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, all of them have the same level. They are all of the highest severity. Genocide is not more severe than war crimes when it comes to sentence, to punishment, etc. But we need to prove everything. And when it comes to the mentioned report from the legal point of view, I don't think that this is really important, because the fact of genocide and the individual criminal liability should be proved in courts, and at best cases it should be proved in the International Criminal Court. This could be proved through Ukrainian courts or universal jurisdiction using mechanisms of other countries. And the responsibility and accountability of Russia could be proved in the UN International Court. But this report just provides some statistical data. It calls for focus, but I cannot say that this has some significant legal impact, and I don't think that we should focus on it that much. Anna, thank you very much for providing all these clarifications. Thank you for joining us today. Anna Vyshniakova was today with us. She's the lawyer in the field of international criminal law. I would like to remind that the UN Commission investigating crimes in Ukraine has not found evidence of genocide committed by Russia against Ukraine. And as of the 11th of May 2022, Russia's genocide was acknowledged by the parliaments of Baltic countries, Parliament of Poland, Ireland, Czech Republic, and Ukraine. We will stop here, and we will continue at noon to discuss how Odesa region has been implementing the Ukrainian program on mental health. Tiak.